Well, on the run, admitted NSA leaker Edward Snowden is fighting for freedom, flying from country to country in an attempt to avoid extradition to the U.S. Let's quickly recap how we got here. Late last week, we found out that federal prosecutors in Virginia had filed charges against Snowden. Those charges included theft of government property, giving national defense information to someone without a security clearance, and revealing classified information about communications intelligence. The latter two charges are considered acts of espionage, which could result in a life sentence or even execution. On Saturday night, word came that the 30-year-old had boarded a plane headed toward Moscow with plans to quickly leave for a third unknown destination. His current whereabouts are unknown, as is his final destination. Joining me now to talk in depth about the fate of this NSA leaker and possible outcomes for him, I'm joined by John Holzman, president of John C. Holzman Enterprises from Berlin. And here in our D.C. studio is former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. Ray, let's start with you. In your opinion, was Edward Snowden's decision to go on the run, to go to all these different countries, a wise decision?
Well, from his point of view, I would say it is an excellent decision. He has lots of examples to look at. Look at what happened to Bradley Manning, eight full months of torture at the hands of the U.S. Marines. I mean, that's something that I wouldn't look forward to. The prospect that some people have adduced that he could have gone through channels, well, just look at the channels. They're all over the Sunday TV shows, and those channels are pretty arrogant and pretty much oppressive. So when he talks about having a personal hand in this architecture of oppression, I mean, it shows the man has a conscience. It shows that when he swore an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, well, you know, he means to abide by that oath.
But at the same time, does it solidify the government argument, the government narrative that he broke the law?
Well, you know, there's a gradation of law breaking, okay? Now, you have a security promise. We all did a little security promise. We signed that when we came on. That's how you get access to classified information. But there are what ethicists call supervening values, you know? One of those is the Constitution of the United States and expressly the Fourth Amendment. That supervening value supersedes and renders inoperative, in my view, a promise to keep secrets. You promise to keep secrets not of crimes, but of legitimate national security information.
Now, John, talk about the idea of shopping around for countries to grant asylum. I mean, is that what Edward Snowden is doing here, and is it legal under international law?
Well, again, I don't think really international law is operative here. I mean, let's go back to the fact that the head of the intelligence community, when asked bluntly just the other week, is the United States spying on its own citizens, said no. Mr. Snowden snapped and said, well, actually, they are. It seems to me that this is what's motivating him, and I think why this is really dividing the country, if you look at polling so far, is that he's quoting the founders back to these people. He's doing this for reasons that don't seem to have anything to do with money or aggrandizement or fame or, frankly, even much of an agenda. And so while he shops for countries and seems to be heading perhaps to Ecuador, the reality is that I don't think this is going to go away. This story has legs precisely because we seem to have bumped into an honest man.
Now, Snowden had a ticket for a flight heading to Cuba on Aeroflot Flight 150. He was scheduled to sit in seat 17A, but it was, in fact, empty. I think we actually might have an image of that empty seat. Now, that seat was empty. However, RT correspondent Igor Piskunov was on that flight. Here's how he describes the scene on board.
So far, Mr. Snowden has not been seen. I personally haven't seen him enter the plane, but definitely something out of the ordinary is happening, just judging by the security itself. And, well, of course, the amount of the media is really astonishing, really. I think it's dozens of journalists who are also on this flight.
Now, Ray, talk about some of the international implications of a person jumping from country to country like this.
Well, the more interesting realities here are the fact that the United States of America is acting like, well, on the one hand, like a great big bully, warning all these countries, don't give any asylum, or even don't let them come through your country. And on the other hand, acting like a sort of pouting like a 2-year-old. You know, I'm so embarrassed. This is terrible. And what it reveals to me is what I would call the metaphor here. And the metaphor is that with all the billions of dollars that General Alexander and all those people have, you know, to snoop and to make sure they know where a fellow like Snowden is, well, there are just as clever people in the embassy in Ecuador and elsewhere around cooperating with WikiLeaks. So far, those people are outwitting the vast complex here, the architecture of oppression. And I think most Americans, when they realize what's going on, since we're usually for the underdog, I think will be very satisfied if Edward Snowden comes out of that bathroom on that plane and shows himself to all the press and says, I'm free.
Now, John, in his on-camera interview with The Guardian's Glenn Greenwald, Edward Snowden said that he is not running away from the U.S. justice system, but that he believes he can do more good from outside of jail than he can do from within it. Do you think that that justification stands 2 weeks after he made that statement?
Yeah, I do, because, I mean, at the moment, while there's the furor about this, we have no idea how many more implications and leaks he has to go about what's going on here. He's selectively been leaking things as he goes. I think there's a lot more to come. The NSA basically data mined on conversations both of foreigners, as they admitted, but also of American citizens, and I imagine there's more to come. I think the nightmare for the security complex in America is if 10% of the people that they hire as contractors have libertarian tendencies, and then 10% of those people actively do something about it. I don't think Edward Snowden is an isolated case. I think this is the reality when the government accrues too much power without thinking through the realities of what goes on. I think all you need are 10 to 15% of the people who are disturbed to do something, and I think there are going to be a lot more Edward Snowdens in the future until, as President Obama said rather lamely, we have a real discussion in the country about the balance between security and liberty, and that's what needs to happen. That's why this story has legs, and that's the fundamental question, frankly, of all governments right now.
And Edward Snowden is not the only person to take flight from the U.S. justice system. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for over a year. Today he spoke with RT about the case of Edward Snowden. Take a look.
The current status of Mr. Snowden and Ms. Harrison both are healthy and safe. They are in contact with their legal team. I cannot give further information as to their whereabouts or present circumstances, other than to say that the matter is in hand. This morning, the U.S. Secretary of State called Edward Snowden a traitor. Edward Snowden is not a traitor. He is not a spy. He is a whistleblower who has told the public an important truth.
Ray, earlier you had mentioned that Edward Snowden had no other outlets to possibly go through in order to leak this information to get this kind of truth out. Now, I know lawmakers, several lawmakers are arguing otherwise. Do you care to explain that statement a little further?
Yes, it's very simple. There is no whistleblower protection for people in the national security apparatus, including contractors of our government. Pure and simple. We have tried to get that through. Congress has X'd it out every time we try to get that through. We've been trying for 15 years now. There is no whistleblower protection.
And finally, John, what should we make of Edward Snowden's flight to these countries? Is there any one lesson that we can learn from all of this?
Well, I think there is. I mean, I think, you know, Mr. Snowden seems to know his founders, and Benjamin Franklin pretty much got it right. If you're willing to give up your liberty to have security, you should have neither. And I think this really does go back to first principles about the United States and why it was founded. I'm an unabashed American patriot, and frankly, this has been the argument at the base of the country since its beginning. And rather than side with a bunch of people who basically lied to us, in effect, the John le Carré line stands: who's watching the watchers? These are people who told us several weeks ago they weren't spying on Americans, who it turned out were spying on Americans, and now their defense is, trust me? Frankly, that doesn't pass muster, and it shouldn't in a country like the United States or any other country, indeed. So I think Snowden's argument is really the argument of the age.
Edward Snowden is the 8th person being charged under the Espionage Act under the Obama administration. That was John Holzman, president of the John C. Holzman Enterprises, and former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. Thank you so much for joining us.
Most welcome, Megan.